standing outside the country club entrance in my best black dress, watching security physically block my path, while my younger sister's wedding reception sparkles behind glass doors. My mother appears designer handbag, clutch tight, eyes cold as winter. "We can't let a poor designer shame this family," she declares loud enough for gathered guests to hear. The humiliation burns through me like acid. But then I remember something that makes me smile. I pull out my phone scroll to recent emails and say calmly, "Then you better pay for her wedding dress." 3 months earlier, I was hunched over my sewing machine in my bridal boutique, threading delicate pearls onto ivory silk, when my phone rang at 11:30 at night. The caller ID showed my sister Sarah's name, and something cold twisted in my stomach. Sarah never called this late unless crisis had struck. "Aleida, thank God you answered." Her voice cracked through the speaker. "My wedding dress designer just canceled everything. She's shutting down her business and moving to Europe. I'm getting married in 12 weeks and have absolutely nothing to wear." I set down my needle and rubbed my tired eyes. Building my wedding dress business from nothing after fashion school had taken everything I had. 7 years of 18-hour days living on ramen noodles, sketching designs in coffee shops because I couldn't afford proper studio space. Now I had a small but thriving boutique in downtown Portland, specializing in custom haute couture gowns that brought brides to tears when they saw themselves transformed. "What about other designers in Seattle?" I asked gently. "Everyone good is booked solid for the entire year," Sarah sobbed. "Mom says your little hobby shop probably can't handle something this important, but I'm desperate. Could you possibly create something for me?" The phrase "little hobby shop" stung like a slap. Our mother, Catherine, had never understood my career choice, viewing fashion design as frivolous compared to Sarah's accounting degree. Every family gathering brought subtle digs about my artistic phase, and when I would get a real job. "Sarah, creating a custom wedding gown takes months of planning and fittings," I explained. 12 weeks is incredibly tight. "Please, Aleida, I'll pay whatever you charge. I just need my big sister to help me." My heart softened at the desperation in her voice. Despite our mother's efforts to create rivalry between us, Sarah and I had maintained genuine affection for each other. She had been the only family member to attend my boutique opening, bringing a bottle of champagne and genuine pride. "Come down this weekend for a consultation," I said. "We'll figure something out." 2 days later, Sarah stood in my fitting room wearing a simple slip while I took detailed measurements. She had always been the conventionally beautiful sister with our mother's elegant bone structure and naturally blonde hair. As I worked, she described her vision classic elegance with modern touches, something that would photograph beautifully but feel comfortable for dancing. "I want to feel like the most beautiful version of myself," she whispered, studying her reflection. "Not like I'm wearing a costume." I sketched quickly while she spoke, envisioning flowing lines that would complement her figure, delicate beadwork that would catch light during the ceremony, a dramatic train that could be bustled for the reception. The design that emerged was unlike anything I had created before, inspired by 1920s glamour, but updated with contemporary sophistication. Our mother arrived unexpectedly during the second fitting, her sharp heels clicking across my studio floor. She wore her usual armor of expensive clothes and judgment, surveying my workspace with barely concealed disdain. "Oh," she said, stopping short when she saw Sarah in the partially completed gown. "This is actually quite stunning." For a moment, hope flickered in my chest. Maybe this project could finally bridge the gap between us, prove that my career deserved respect. I had been working 60-hour weeks, canceling other clients to ensure Sarah's dress would be perfect. Every bead was hand-sewn, every seam finished with museum-quality precision. Aleida designed everything herself. Sarah beamed, turning to show the intricate back detail. Look at this embroidery. It tells the story of our family tree in tiny stitches. Mother circled us slowly, examining the craftsmanship with a critic's eye. The construction is quite professional, she admitted grudgingly. Perhaps your skills have developed beyond what I expected. That evening, I stayed late to finish the bodice beadwork, feeling lighter than I had in years. Maybe success really could heal old wounds. Maybe my mother would finally see me as accomplished rather than disappointing. But as I locked up the studio, I heard her voice through the thin walls of the office next door, speaking loudly on her phone to someone. "Yes, we're getting the dress for free," she laughed. "My daughter owes us that much after all the embarrassment she's caused our family name. After everything we spent on her ridiculous fashion school education, she can finally contribute something useful." I stood frozen in the darkened hallway, keys trembling in my hand, as the truth crashed over me like ice water. The next morning, I confronted my mother directly outside the coffee shop where she held her weekly book club meetings. She looked genuinely surprised to see me adjusting her silk scarf against the October chill. "Aleida, darling, what brings you downtown so early?" "We need to discuss payment for Sarah's wedding dress," I said without preamble. Her expression shifted subtly, warmth replaced by calculated coolness. "Payment? Surely you don't expect your own sister to pay for your wedding gift to her?" The word gift hung between us like a weapon. I thought about the 47 hours I had already invested, the premium imported silk I had purchased with my own credit card, the other clients I had turned away to accommodate Sarah's timeline. "Mom, I run a business, not a charity," I said carefully. "Custom bridal gowns start at $8,000. She laughed, a sound like breaking glass. $8,000! For playing dress up, Aleida, be realistic. After everything your father and I sacrificed for your education, surely you can help your sister without demanding payment like some stranger." The familiar guilt manipulation settled over me like a heavy coat. When I was 22 and graduating from fashion school, our family had faced financial crisis. Dad's construction company went bankrupt during the recession, forcing my parents to sell their house and move to a modest apartment. They had blamed my expensive education for draining their savings, never mentioning Dad's gambling problem or Mom's shopping addiction. "The wedding costs have already spiraled beyond our means." Mother continued, her voice taking on the martyred tone I knew so well. "The venue catering flowers have maxed out our credit cards. We're borrowing against your father's retirement just to pay for the reception." "How much is the total wedding budget?" I asked. She hesitated just long enough for me to know she was calculating how much truth to reveal. "Around $48,000. Far beyond what a struggling family should spend, but Sarah had her heart set on a beautiful celebration. $48,000, my entire annual income from the boutique. I thought about my own modest apartment, my second-hand furniture, the way I shopped for groceries with calculators and coupons to afford the materials for my art. My father appeared from the coffee shop looking uncomfortable but loyal. Frank had aged dramatically since the bankruptcy, his shoulders permanently hunched as if carrying invisible weight. "Your mother's right, sweetheart," he said quietly. "Family helps family. That dress is your contribution to Sarah's happiness." That evening, my business partner Jasmine found me crying over the half-finished gown. Jasmine had been my roommate in fashion school and had invested her inheritance in our shared boutique dream. She was the practical one handling contracts and finances while I focused on design. "You cannot work for free," she said firmly, pouring wine into 2 mismatched glasses. "It sets a dangerous precedent and devalues everything we've built here." "But it's my sister's wedding." "Your sister who makes $75,000 a year as a CPA and could afford to pay you properly," Jasmine countered. "Aleida, successful businesses charge for their services, even family businesses." Over the following weeks, I worked late every night hand-sewing thousands of tiny crystals that caught light like captured stars. My fingers bled from needle pricks, my back ached from hunching over the sewing machine, but the dress was becoming something magnificent. Other clients called asking about their delayed orders, and I had to turn away 3 new consultations because I had no time. Sarah came for her final fitting on a rainy Thursday afternoon, glowing with excitement as she saw the completed gown. The dress transformed her into someone almost ethereal, the beadwork creating an illusion of floating starlight. "I've never felt more beautiful in my entire life," she whispered, tears gathering in her eyes. "Thank you for making this dream real." But as she changed back into street clothes, she mentioned casually that the wedding planner had suggested upgrading the reception linens and adding a champagne fountain. "It's only another $6,000, she said. "Mom thinks we can manage it somehow." That weekend, curiosity drove me to research the country club where Sarah's reception was booked. The Riverside Country Club was the most exclusive venue in the city, with a minimum spending requirement of $75,000 for wedding receptions. Their website featured photographs of crystal chandeliers, imported marble floors, and gardens that looked like something from a fairy tale. When I called pretending to be a potential bride, the events coordinator cheerfully confirmed that Sarah's wedding was scheduled for their premium package, including $10,000 floral arrangements, a live orchestra, and premium liquor service. My blood turned to ice as I did the mathematics. This wasn't a struggling family cutting corners to afford their daughter's dream wedding. This was a lavish celebration that cost more than most people's annual salaries. I confronted my mother that same evening, finding her at home arranging flowers she had bought at the expensive boutique across town. "The Riverside Country Club," I said without greeting. "Their minimum spending for weddings is $75,000. She didn't look up from the white roses she was trimming. "I don't know what you mean." "You told me the wedding budget was $48,000 and that you were struggling financially. But the venue alone costs more than that." Finally, she set down her scissors and met my eyes. "Wedding costs are more complicated than you understand, Aleida. There are payment plans, family discounts arrangements you wouldn't comprehend." "What family discounts?" "The kind that come from having a successful daughter in the wedding industry," she said coolly. "Your growing reputation has opened doors for us." A terrible suspicion began forming in my mind. "What exactly have you told people about my involvement in this wedding?" But she had already turned back to her flowers, dismissing me with practiced efficiency. "I'm sure everything will work out beautifully. Family always does." Wedding morning arrived gray and drizzly, typical October weather that threatened to turn Sarah's outdoor ceremony into a muddy disaster. I delivered the finished dress to her bridal suite at the luxury hotel where the wedding party was preparing, carrying it carefully in a protective garment bag that cost more than most people spent on their entire wedding outfit. Sarah's hotel room looked like a high-end spa filled with professional makeup artists, hairstylists, and a photographer who seemed to be documenting every moment. White orchids imported from Hawaii filled crystal vases, and someone had arranged a champagne breakfast that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. "Aleida!" Sarah squealed when she saw me rushing over in her silk robe and perfectly styled hair. "I can barely sleep last night. I'm so excited to put on the dress." Watching her step into the gown I had created felt like witnessing magic. The silk flowed over her like water, the beadwork catching morning light and throwing tiny rainbows across the hotel room walls. Every stitch I had sewn by hand, every crystal I had placed with tweezers, every detail I had obsessed over came together to create something truly breathtaking. "Sarah, you look like a princess," her maid of honor breathed. But as I helped adjust the delicate shoulder straps, I noticed details that made my chest tighten with unease. The wedding planner's clipboard showed vendor invoices totaling far more than anything my mother had mentioned. Imported orchids at $300 per arrangement, a string quartet from the symphony orchestra, crystal chandeliers rented specifically for the ceremony tent. "This is incredible," the wedding photographer murmured, capturing shots of Sarah in the dress. "Your sister is incredibly talented. I heard she's expanding nationally soon." "Expanding nationally?" I asked, confused. Sarah looked equally puzzled. "That's what Mom told everyone. She said you're opening boutiques in 5 major cities next year." I had no plans for expansion. My single boutique was successful but modest, nowhere near ready for that kind of growth. But before I could ask more questions, Sarah's phone rang with updates about flower delivery and transportation schedules. As I prepared to leave for the ceremony, the wedding planner casually mentioned that the total celebration was costing close to $90,000. "Your mother has exquisite taste," she said admiringly, "and having a daughter in the fashion industry certainly helps with vendor relationships." $90,000. The number echoed in my head as I drove to the Riverside Country Club, trying to reconcile it with my mother's claims of financial struggle. I called my father during the drive, hoping for honest answers. "Dad, how are you actually paying for Sarah's wedding?" Long silence. Then reluctantly, "Your mother inherited money from her aunt 6 months ago. Quite a substantial sum." "How substantial?" "Enough to cover the wedding and then some," he admitted quietly. "But Aleida, please don't cause problems today. Sarah deserves her perfect day." I arrived at the country club feeling like Alice falling down the rabbit hole, no longer certain what was real. The venue was even more spectacular than the photos suggested, with manicured gardens leading to a pavilion decorated with thousands of white roses. Guests in designer clothing sipped cocktails while a jazz trio played background music. But when I approached the entrance, a security guard in an expensive suit stepped into my path. "Name, please." "Aleida Morrison. I'm the bride's sister." He consulted a detailed list on his tablet, scanning it twice. "I'm sorry, but you're not on the guest list." "There must be a mistake," I said, my voice staying level despite the growing knot in my stomach. "I'm immediate family." "Let me check with management," he said, speaking into his radio with professional courtesy. Other guests were beginning to notice the hold-up phones appearing as people sensed potential drama. I stood there in my carefully chosen black dress, feeling increasingly conspicuous as whispered conversations started around me. A waiter approached someone who had helped with catering at my boutique's anniversary party. "Ms. Morrison, is everything all right?" "There seems to be some confusion about the guest list," I said. His expression grew uncomfortable. "I received specific instructions about uninvited family members," he said quietly. "I'm sorry, but I can't override the host's wishes." That's when my mother appeared, gliding across the marble entrance like a queen holding court. She wore a dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent, her hair professionally, styled her makeup flawless. She looked like someone who had never worried about money in her entire life. "Aleida," she said loudly enough for nearby guests to hear her voice carrying across the entrance hall. "What are you doing here?" "Attending my sister's wedding," I replied, aware that our conversation was becoming entertainment for the gathered crowd. She laughed, the same crystalline sound I remembered from my childhood whenever she wanted to make someone feel small. "Darling, this is a formal celebration. We can't let a poor designer shame the family in front of our important guests." The words hit like physical blows. Poor designer, shame the family, important guests. Every syllable calculated to humiliate me in the most public way possible. But as I stood there feeling the weight of stares and the burn of embarrassment, something my business partner had said echoed in my memory. Successful businesses charge for their services, even family businesses. I pulled out my phone, scrolled to my recent emails, and found exactly what I was looking for. The detailed invoice I had prepared out of professional habit, itemizing every hour of work, every material cost, every design fee that would normally be charged for a gown of this caliber. "Then you better pay for her wedding dress," I said calmly, my voice carrying clearly across the suddenly quiet entrance hall. My mother's confident expression flickered like a candle in wind. "What are you talking about?" That was obviously a gift. I held up my phone so she could see the screen where my professional invoice glowed in neat itemized lines. $12,500 for custom bridal gown design and creation. The number hung in the air like a thunderclap. Conversations around us stopped entirely as guests strained to hear what was happening. My mother's face went through several shades of pale, settling on ashen gray. Consultation and design development, 8 hours at $150 per hour. I read aloud in the same calm tone I used with difficult clients. Premium imported silk fabric, $2,300. Hand-sewn Swarovski crystal beadwork, $1,800. Custom embroidery depicting family tree design, $1,200. Construction and fitting time, 47 hours at $125 per hour. With each item, my mother's composure cracked a little more. The guests who had been watching our scene were now actively listening, some pulling out phones to record what was clearly becoming a spectacular family drama. "Aleida, stop this nonsense immediately," she hissed, but her voice lacked its usual authority. "Pattern creation, grading, and technical drawings, 6 hours at $150 per hour. Rush timeline surcharge for 12-week completion, 15% of total labor costs. Premium construction techniques including French seams and hand-finished hems, $800. Sarah appeared in the entrance, still in her wedding dress, but looking horrified at the scene unfolding. "What's happening? Why is everyone staring?" "Your mother is disputing payment for your wedding dress," I explained simply. "Payment." Sarah's confusion was genuine. "Mom, you said Aleida was giving me the dress as a wedding gift." "She is," Mother said desperately. "This is just Aleida trying to embarrass the family with her inappropriate demands." I turned the phone screen toward Sarah so she could see the invoice. "This is what any other bride would pay for a custom gown with these specifications. The dress you're wearing took 2 months of full-time work to create." Sarah's face went white as she read the detailed breakdown. $12,500, Aleida. I had no idea it cost so much. I would never have asked if I'd known." "Your sister is being dramatic," Mother interrupted. "She's trying to ruin your wedding day with her greed." But other family members were gathering now, drawn by the commotion. Uncle Robert, Dad's brother, who owned a successful plumbing business, stepped closer to examine my phone screen. "That's actually quite reasonable for custom work of this quality," he said thoughtfully. "I charge similar rates for complex installations. Labor and materials don't come free even for family." My father appeared looking mortified but trying to mediate. "Perhaps we should discuss this privately after the ceremony." "There's nothing to discuss," I said firmly. "Either the dress was a commissioned piece of professional work or it was a gift freely given. But you can't claim financial hardship to avoid payment while spending $90,000 on a wedding celebration." The number 90,000 rippled through the crowd like a shock wave. Several guests exchanged glances clearly, doing their own mental calculations about the elaborate venue-imported flowers and premium catering they were witnessing. That's when the wedding photographer approached our group looking agitated and confused. "Excuse me, Mrs. Morrison, but I need clarification about my payment. I was told this was a family rate situation because of your daughter's connections in the industry." My mother's face went from pale to bright red. "That's a separate matter entirely." "Actually, it's not," the photographer continued. I've been working under the assumption that Aleida arranged a professional courtesy discount through her network. But if she's not involved in the wedding planning, then my original contract pricing applies. That's an additional $4,000 from the reduced rate I quoted. A videographer materialized beside him, nodding gravely. Same situation here. I was told Aleida was coordinating vendor relationships and that we'd all be featuring in her promotional materials as part of the payment arrangement. The florist, a woman I vaguely recognized from industry events, joined the growing circle. Mrs. Morrison, I need to clarify our agreement as well. The premium orchid arrangements were priced assuming cross-promotion with Aleida's boutique social media. If that's not happening, there's a significant balance due. My mother looked like a cornered animal, her eyes darting between the vendors and the growing crowd of guests who were now openly staring and recording. This is a misunderstanding. These people are trying to extort money from a family celebration. But my phone was buzzing with text messages from other vendors whose names I didn't recognize. Apparently, word was spreading quickly through whatever professional network my mother had tapped into using my reputation. "How many vendors did you contact using my name?" I asked quietly. "I don't know what you mean," she said, but her voice was shaking now. Sarah stepped between us, looking devastated in her beautiful dress. "Mom, please just tell us the truth. What did you promise these people?" Before my mother could answer, the country club's events manager appeared, clipboard in hand and expression serious. "Mrs. Morrison, we need to resolve some payment issues before the reception can continue. Several vendors are disputing their contract terms, and hotel policy requires immediate clarification." Behind him stood a uniformed sheriff's deputy, looking official and patient in the way that suggested this wasn't his first vendor dispute at a high-end wedding venue. My mother looked at the deputy, then at the crowd of guests recording everything, then at Sarah in her $12,500 dress, and finally at me with something that might have been respect flickering in her eyes. "Perhaps," she said carefully, "we should continue this conversation somewhere more private." The hotel's conference room felt like a courtroom as we gathered around the polished mahogany table. My mother sat rigid in her chair, still wearing her expensive dress, but looking significantly less regal than she had an hour earlier. Sarah had changed out of her wedding gown into a simple blue dress, tears still drying on her cheeks. My father slumped in his seat like a man watching his life collapse in real time. Across from us sat 5 vendors each, holding contracts and looking increasingly agitated. The photographer, videographer, florist, catering coordinator, and wedding planner had apparently spent the past hour comparing notes and discovering a pattern of deception that stretched far beyond my dress. The hotel's events manager, a professional woman named Janet, opened a thick folder and spread documents across the table. "Let's start with the photography contract," she said in the tone of someone accustomed to mediating difficult situations. The photographer, a bearded man named Marcus, pulled out his phone and began reading from email exchanges. "Mrs. Morrison contacted me 6 weeks ago, explaining that her daughter Aleida was a prominent fashion designer expanding nationally. She said Aleida was personally curating vendors for a high-profile family wedding that would serve as a showcase for my work." He scrolled through screenshots of text messages. "She specifically mentioned that Aleida's boutique had 50,000 social media followers and that wedding photos would be featured in a major bridal magazine article about Pacific Northwest designers." I stared at my mother in disbelief. "I have 800 Instagram followers, and I've never been contacted by any magazine." Marcus continued reading. "In exchange for this promotional opportunity, Mrs. Morrison negotiated my fee down from $6,000 to $2,000. She also mentioned that Aleida would be covering the difference as an investment in her expanding business." The videographer, a young woman with purple hair, nodded vigorously. "Nearly identical story here. I was told Aleida was launching a multimedia marketing campaign and needed wedding footage for her portfolio. Original quote was $4,500 reduced to $1,500 with the promise of promotional consideration. As each vendor shared their story, a picture emerged of systematic deception that made my stomach turn. My mother had used my name and reputation to negotiate thousands of dollars in discounts, creating fictional business arrangements that I knew nothing about. "The floral contract is particularly interesting," said the florist, a stern woman with soil under her fingernails. Mrs. Morrison provided what appeared to be official business cards from Aleida's boutique, complete with a company email address that I used for all our communications. She handed me a business card that looked professional and legitimate, except for one crucial detail. It listed me as Creative Director of Morrison Bridal Enterprises and included a phone number I had never seen before. "This isn't my business," I said, studying the card. "I've never heard of Morrison Bridal Enterprises." Sarah examined the card with growing horror. "Mom, did you create a fake business?" My mother's silence was answer enough. Janet, the events manager, made notes on her legal pad while the sheriff's deputy observed quietly from the corner. The catering coordinator, a harried-looking man with flour on his apron, opened his laptop and turned the screen toward us. "I have email chains here discussing menu modifications and service upgrades. The communications came from an Aleida Morrison at Morrison Bridal Enterprises requesting premium upgrades in exchange for promotional benefits." He clicked through a series of emails that made my blood run cold. Someone had been impersonating me professionally for weeks, making decisions about Sarah's wedding while using my reputation to avoid paying full price. "Who has access to these email accounts?" the deputy asked, speaking for the first time. My mother finally found her voice. "This is all a terrible misunderstanding. I was simply trying to help my daughter have a beautiful wedding while supporting Aleida's growing business." "By committing fraud," Janet said matter-of-factly, "creating false business entities and impersonating licensed professionals is a criminal offense in Oregon." The room fell silent except for the sound of Sarah's quiet sobbing. My father reached across the table and took her hand, looking like he had aged 10 years in the past hour. "How much money are we talking about?" he asked quietly. Janet consulted her notes. "Preliminary calculations suggest approximately $23,000 in fraudulent discounts across all vendors plus the $12,500 for the wedding dress. The total disputed amount is $35,500. The number hit like a physical blow. This wasn't a simple family misunderstanding about gift expectations. This was organized fraud using my identity and business reputation. "There's more," Marcus the photographer said reluctantly. "Mrs. Morrison also arranged for me to contact other vendors, recommending them for the Morrison Bridal Enterprises preferred vendor list. I may have inadvertently helped spread this deception to people I've never met." My phone buzzed with another incoming call from an unknown number. In the past hour, I had received 17 calls from vendors across the city, all asking about work arrangements that I knew nothing about. "Sarah," I said gently, "did you know about any of this?" My sister looked up with red-rimmed eyes. "I swear I thought you were helping coordinate everything as a wedding gift. Mom said you were excited about using our wedding to showcase your work and expand your business." The wedding planner, an efficient woman named Patricia, cleared her throat. "I should mention that Mrs. Morrison also negotiated significant reductions in my fee based on the Morrison Bridal Enterprises partnership. However, she did pay my reduced rate in full, unlike some of the other vendors. Because she knew I would be handling the coordination work for free." I said, the pieces finally clicking together. She planned for me to do the actual work that justified the discounts. Janet looked up from her legal pad. "This appears to be a case of intentional fraud rather than miscommunication. The creation of false business entities, impersonation of a licensed professional, and systematic deception of multiple vendors suggests premeditation. The deputy stepped forward. Mrs. Morrison, I need to inform you that multiple vendors have filed complaints about fraudulent business practices. Hotel policy requires us to resolve these disputes immediately or pursue criminal charges. My mother finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. What do you need me to do? Pay the outstanding balances in full, Janet said simply. All vendors need to be compensated according to their original contract terms, and any fraudulent arrangements need to be corrected immediately. My father pulled out his phone and began making calls to their bank, his voice shaking as he tried to arrange emergency fund transfers. Sarah continued crying quietly, her perfect wedding day transformed into a financial and legal nightmare. But as I sat there watching my family face the consequences of my mother's deception, I felt something unexpected relief. For years, I had questioned my own perceptions, wondering if I was being too sensitive about my mother's treatment of my career. Now I had undeniable proof that her behavior went far beyond mere disapproval into active sabotage. The truth, however painful, was finally being revealed. 3 days later, I sat in the same hotel conference room, but this time with my attorney present and a court stenographer recording every word. The legal mediation session felt like a trial, with evidence spread across the table and testimonies being given under oath. My business attorney, David Chen, was a sharp-dressed man who specialized in protecting small businesses from fraud. He had spent the weekend documenting the full scope of my mother's deception, and his findings were staggering. Ladies and gentlemen, David began opening a thick folder. What we have here is systematic identity theft and business fraud, spanning 6 weeks and involving 14 separate vendors across the Portland metropolitan area. He handed copies of printed emails to everyone present. Mrs. Catherine Morrison created false business entities, forged professional credentials, and impersonated a licensed business owner to obtain services under fraudulent pretenses. The evidence was overwhelming. Email accounts created in my name, business cards printed with fake contact information, social media profiles claiming to represent my boutique, and professional references that linked back to fictional partnerships. The financial damage extends beyond the immediate vendor payments, David continued. Ms. Aleida Morrison's professional reputation has been compromised by promises that were made in her name, but without her knowledge or consent. Marcus, the photographer, testified, first explaining how the fake promotional opportunities had led him to recommend Morrison Bridal Enterprises to 3 other weddings, all of whom were now demanding refunds for services that would never be provided. I've had to issue formal apologies to 6 professional contacts, he said, reading from a prepared statement. My own business reputation has been damaged by unwittingly participating in this fraud. The florist presented evidence of a fake website that had been created using stolen photos from my boutique portfolio. The site claimed to represent a luxury bridal consortium with locations in 5 cities, she explained. It looked completely legitimate, complete with fake customer testimonials and fabricated press coverage. Sarah testified next, her voice barely audible as she described her mother's manipulation. Mom told me that Aleida was desperate to use our wedding as a portfolio piece for her national expansion. She said Aleida had specifically requested to coordinate all the vendors as practice for managing larger events. She looked directly at our mother as she continued. I thought I was helping my sister's career by agreeing to let her handle the vendor relationships. I had no idea she wasn't actually involved in any of the communications. My father's testimony was the most difficult to hear. He explained how my mother had hidden the inheritance from her aunt, spending thousands on personal shopping while claiming financial hardship to the family. Catherine told me the wedding was being funded through payment plans and family discounts. He said, his voice heavy with shame. I didn't question the details because I trusted her to handle the arrangements responsibly. When asked about his knowledge of the fake business entities, he broke down completely. I knew nothing about Morrison Bridal Enterprises or the vendor negotiations. I thought Aleida was genuinely helping coordinate the wedding as a gift to her sister. The hotel's legal counsel presented evidence that the fraud had extended to their venue contract as well. Mrs. Morrison negotiated a substantial discount by claiming the wedding would be featured in a prominent bridal magazine article showcasing the venue's capabilities, the attorney explained. No such article was ever commissioned or planned. When it was my mother's turn to testify, she sat rigid and silent for several minutes before finally speaking. I wanted Sarah to have a perfect wedding, she said finally. I knew we couldn't afford everything she dreamed of, but I also knew Aleida was successful enough to help if she chose to. So you decided to make that choice for her, David observed. I thought if the wedding was beautiful enough, if it showcased Aleida's work properly, it would benefit her business in the long term, she continued. I was trying to create opportunities for both my daughters. By stealing your daughter's identity and defrauding multiple small businesses, David said flatly. The financial reckoning was severe. Beyond the $35,500 owed to vendors, there were penalties for breach of contract fees for legal mediation and costs for repairing the damage to my professional reputation. But the most shocking revelation came when David presented evidence of intercepted business correspondence. During our investigation, we discovered that Mrs. Morrison had been systematically intercepting and hiding mail addressed to Aleida's boutique. He handed me a stack of letters that made my hands tremble. 3 different fashion houses had sent offers for collaborative partnerships over the past year. A major bridal chain had invited me to submit designs for their upcoming seasonal collection. A fashion magazine had requested an interview about emerging designers in the Pacific Northwest. All of these opportunities were never delivered to Ms. Morrison, David explained. They were intercepted and hidden apparently to prevent Aleida from achieving the kind of success that might make her less dependent on family approval. The revelation hit like a physical blow. My mother hadn't just stolen money and vendors for Sarah's wedding. She had been actively sabotaging my career for years, ensuring that I remained small and struggling enough to be easily manipulated. Sarah gasped when she heard this evidence, finally understanding the full scope of our mother's behavior. Mom, how could you do this to your own daughter? For the first time in the proceedings, my mother's composure cracked completely. I was protecting her, she sobbed. The fashion industry is so competitive and cruel. I wanted to keep her close to family where she'd be safe. By destroying her opportunities for growth, David said quietly. Mrs. Morrison, your actions constitute felony fraud, identity theft, and interference with business operations. The district attorney's office could pursue criminal charges that carry significant prison time. The room fell silent except for my mother's quiet crying. After years of being treated like the family failure, I was watching the truth finally surface in ways that couldn't be denied or manipulated. Janet from the hotel presented the final settlement terms. Mrs. Morrison will pay all outstanding vendor balances within 72 hours. She will publicly apologize to each affected vendor and provide written statements clearing Aleida of any responsibility for the fraudulent arrangements. She will also enter counseling for behavioral issues as a condition of avoiding criminal prosecution. My father signed personal guarantees for the debt, emptying their retirement savings and taking out a second mortgage on their small house. The financial consequences would impact them for years to come. But as painful as the legal process was, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: validation. My instincts about my mother's behavior had been correct. The doubts she had planted about my career, my choices, my worth as a family member were revealed to be deliberate manipulations designed to maintain control. The truth finally unveiled was setting me free. 6 months later, I stood in my expanded boutique watching sunlight stream through the new floor-to-ceiling windows as customers browsed gowns that sparkled like captured starlight. The space had tripled in size, featuring dedicated consultation suites, a spacious fitting area, and a design studio where I could work while clients watched their dreams take shape in silk and satin. The transformation had begun with those intercepted letters my attorney discovered. The fashion house partnerships led to a collaboration with a major bridal chain, resulting in a signature collection that would be featured in 50 stores across the country. The magazine interview became a cover story about emerging designers who were reshaping the industry. Each stolen opportunity once reclaimed had opened doors I never could have imagined. Sarah stood at the main counter carefully cataloging new inventory with the precise attention to detail that made her such a skilled accountant. She had been working part-time at the boutique for 3 months, learning the business while rebuilding our relationship one conversation at a time. The new Marianne collection arrived this morning. She called out, holding up a gown that seemed to float in her arms. These are going to be incredibly popular for spring weddings. We had repurposed her wedding dress from that disastrous celebration, transforming it into the centerpiece of an elegant evening gown collection. The beadwork that had taken me so many painful hours now served as inspiration for designs that other women could afford and enjoy. Nothing was wasted, and the pain had been transformed into something beautiful. My father appeared in the doorway carrying a toolbox and wearing the satisfied expression of someone who had found useful work. "The new dressing room mirrors are installed," he announced, "and I fixed that wobbly display case while I was at it." Frank had been volunteering at the boutique twice a week since the legal settlement, helping with maintenance and repairs, while slowly rebuilding his relationship with both his daughters. The shame of the fraud case had devastated him initially, but honest work and genuine contribution to my success had helped restore his sense of purpose. "Dad, you don't have to keep fixing things for free," I said gently. "I can afford to hire proper contractors now." "I want to help," he replied simply. "I spent too many years not supporting your dreams properly. Let me make up for some of that time." The bell above the door chimed as my business partner Jasmine entered with our newest client, a radiant bride-to-be who had driven from Seattle specifically to work with our studio. Word of mouth from satisfied customers had created a waiting list that stretched 4 months into the future. "Aleida, meet Jennifer," Jasmine said warmly. "She's planning a December wedding and fell in love with your Aurora collection after seeing it featured in Modern Bride magazine." As I began the consultation process that had become both art and science, I marveled at how naturally success felt when it wasn't clouded by family manipulation. Every client was a joy to work with, every design challenge an opportunity to create something extraordinary. The legal settlement had been completed 2 months earlier, with all vendors fully compensated and my professional reputation not just restored, but enhanced. The publicity from the fraud case, while initially embarrassing, had led to national media coverage about small business rights and family boundary issues that resonated with thousands of women. A book agent had contacted me about writing a memoir exploring family dynamics in female-owned businesses. The advance would fund the expansion into 2 additional cities, making my mother's fictional claims about national growth ironically prophetic. But the most meaningful change was personal. My romantic relationship with David, the attorney who had handled my case, had developed slowly from professional respect into genuine partnership. He understood the complexities of family trauma and supported my healing process without trying to fix everything himself. Around 4 in the afternoon, as Sarah was helping Jennifer select fabrics for her gown, the boutique door opened again. My mother stepped inside tentatively, wearing a simple dress I didn't recognize and carrying a handwritten letter. She had been attending counseling sessions as part of her legal settlement, working with a therapist who specialized in controlling behavior and family manipulation. The public apologies to vendors had been humiliating but necessary, and she had been making slow progress toward understanding the damage her actions had caused. "I wrote you a letter," she said quietly, approaching the counter where I was reviewing design sketches. My therapist suggested I express my thoughts in writing first to make sure I said everything I needed to say. I accepted the envelope, noting how her hand shook slightly as she handed it over. "Would you like to talk here, or should we go somewhere private?" "Here is fine," she said, glancing around the successful business she had spent years trying to diminish. "I want to see what you've built without my interference." The letter was several pages long, written in her careful handwriting, and began with the words I had been waiting my entire adult life to hear. I was wrong about everything. She wrote about her fears of losing control, her inability to accept that her daughters might surpass her own achievements, and the twisted logic that had convinced her that sabotaging my career was a form of protection. She acknowledged the fraud, the manipulation, and the years of emotional damage with a clarity that suggested genuine therapeutic work. "I spent so long trying to keep you small that I forgot to celebrate your greatness." One paragraph read, "Your success terrified me because it proved that my way of thinking about safety and control was completely mistaken. You were brave enough to pursue your dreams despite my discouragement, and instead of being proud, I felt threatened." The letter concluded with a request rather than a demand. "I would like to start over if you're willing, not as mother and child with predetermined roles, but as two adults who can learn to respect each other. I understand if you're not ready for that, and I promise to accept whatever boundaries you need to set." I looked up from the letter to find her watching me with genuine nervousness, no longer the confident woman who had once dismissed my career as a hobby. Therapy and consequences had changed her in ways that seemed authentic rather than performative. "I'm willing to try," I said carefully, "but things can't go back to the way they were before. This relationship has to be built on honesty and mutual respect." She nodded quickly. "I understand. I don't expect forgiveness immediately or trust or anything except the possibility of earning those things over time." Sarah had been listening from across the boutique, and she approached us with tears in her eyes. "Mom, I'm proud of you for writing that letter. I know it couldn't have been easy." As we stood there in my successful boutique, surrounded by the evidence of dreams achieved despite rather than because of family support, I felt something shift in my chest. The anger that had driven me through the legal proceedings was beginning to transform into something more complex: hope. Recovery from family trauma wasn't about dramatic forgiveness or sudden reconciliation. It was about setting boundaries, maintaining self-respect, and allowing space for people to genuinely change if they chose to do the work. My mother was finally doing the work. As closing time approached and the last customers departed with appointments scheduled for future fittings, I gathered my family around the main counter to share news I had been saving for the right moment. "I have something to tell you all," I said, pulling out a formal letter from the Portland Small Business Association. "The boutique has been selected as this year's recipient of the Women's Entrepreneurship Excellence Award." Sarah squealed with excitement, my father beamed with pride, and my mother wiped away tears that seemed genuinely happy for the first time I could remember. The award came with a $10,000 grant for business expansion and recognition as one of the city's most successful woman-owned enterprises. More importantly, it represented validation from my professional community that my work had value and impact beyond family opinions. "There's going to be a ceremony next month," I continued, "and I'd like you all to be there as my guests celebrating this achievement together." My mother looked surprised. "Are you sure you want me there after everything that's happened?" "I'm sure," I said, meaning it. This award represents everything I've accomplished despite the obstacles I've faced. Having you there to witness that success feels like the right way to close this chapter and begin writing a new one. As we locked up the boutique and prepared to go our separate ways, I realized that the most profound victory wasn't the business success or legal vindication or media recognition. It was the knowledge that I had survived family toxicity with my sense of self intact, built something meaningful from my own vision and effort, and created space for authentic relationships to develop. Sometimes the greatest revenge against those who try to keep you small is simply refusing to stay small. Sometimes justice looks like success that can't be diminished or controlled by anyone else. And sometimes, if you're very fortunate, the people who hurt you find the courage to change and ask for the chance to love you properly. Standing outside my boutique in the evening light, watching my family walk toward their separate cars, but planning to meet for dinner later in the week, I understood that healing didn't require forgetting the past. It required transforming pain into wisdom, boundaries into self-respect, and dreams deferred into dreams achieved. The little girl who had been told her artistic aspirations were frivolous had grown into a woman whose art brought joy to hundreds of brides and whose business success could no longer be dismissed or diminished. That transformation was worth celebrating whether anyone else understood its significance or not. Have you ever had to stand up to family members who tried to control or diminish your dreams? How did you find the courage to set boundaries while keeping your heart open to genuine change? Share your story in the comments below, and if this message resonated with you, please like this video, subscribe for more stories about overcoming family challenges, and share it with someone who might need to hear that their dreams matter just as much as anyone else's expectations. Thank you for listening to my journey, and I wish you the strength to build the life you envision regardless of who believes in it. Remember that sometimes the greatest gift you can give your family is showing them what's possible when love replaces control and success becomes something to celebrate rather than fear.